Good morning. I have been trying to wrap my head around a simple way of explaining a particular concept for the last week now. It's getting to me, because it's like when I come up with ideas for these videos, it comes to me, and then like in a way, like unconsciously, I fully understand. I understand what I want to talk about, but putting it into words is difficult, let alone putting it into words that I feel are easy to understand, that don't rely on understanding bigger concepts that are behind that, and trying to use analogies and metaphors and direct experiences that I think that most people will have, so that they can actually understand what I'm talking about. It's not as simple as, it's like I could talk about electricity, but in my mind I actually visualize the electrons and the forces between them, and how a capacitor never actually transfers current from one lead to the other. It's actually a buildup of charged particles and blah blah blah. And this doesn't make sense to anybody. So I have to explain. I either have to back explain myself so that you understand how an electron works all by itself, so that then I can explain how they would pass through, or I can use metaphors like water, or I could do this, or I could do that, but I have to think of these new ways of explaining things, and this so that it can be understood. And I tell you what, this one's been a real head scratcher, because it's kind of paradoxical, but it's incredibly simple at the same time. So basically, it's the idea of multitasking. There's a lot of people, educated and otherwise, who believe that you can't actually really, how do I put it? You can't actually multitask. And that's defining multitasking as being able to perform more than one task, either mentally or physically, right? Either you can think about multiple topics at once, or you can do multiple things at once, or a combination of the two. And it's partly true and partly false. You can't really consciously do that, but you can unconsciously. You can unconsciously do multiple things at once. See, a really, really, really simple way of imagining the unconscious mind is a computer. And the conscious mind is literally just the screen, just what's on the screen, and what you can interact with. So you've got a keyboard, you've got a mouse, you can move the mouse, and then the cursor moves, and then you press the click, and then it clicks on something, and something opens, and you're playing games and surfing the net and all that sort of stuff, right? Now, that's what you can see and what you can interact with. However, you have to appreciate that behind the screen is so many processes, so much code and hardware that you cannot see. You'd have to somehow hack into the software and hack into the memory registries and the processor and all this to be able to actually see what's being written to memory and what's the data being sent to the video card and the mouse and the keyboard and the hard drive. there's data being transferred back and forwards from these places, right? And you can't physically see any of that stuff going on. You can't control any of that stuff. You can click on open this software, but what's actually happening is your mouse is moving. It's creating data, like to say the position of the mouse, which is telling the data, the background software, to move the cursor. So you're not moving the cursor, you're just creating the data to tell the computer to move these pixels on the screen so it looks like it's moving, right? And then you press click, and then the click sends data to the background processors, and then all this wonderful stuff happens. It's kind of hard to get your head around that's how a computer works, but the mind is exactly the same. We've got stuff that we're aware of, which is like the screen. We're only aware of what we can see on the computer and what we can hear through the speakers. That's about it. You know? We've only really got two ways to see what's going on inside a computer. That's what we see, what we hear. So far. And in the same way, our conscious mind, which is what we're viewing, only has access to our senses, our sight, our hearing, our taste, our touch, Now, even when we're seeing stuff, what's happening is where the data's coming in from our eyes, it's going into the visual cortex, which is decoding the information and then sending it to our conscious mind. So we know what stuff looks like. The same thing happens with our hearing, with our taste. Our smell goes directly to the brain without much processing, but it's still processed a little bit before it gets to our conscious mind and blah, blah, blah. So, the interesting thing about the unconscious mind is you can do so many things. So much stuff is going on in the background that you are completely unaware of. For example, your unconscious mind right now is processing what's in your peripheral vision. Now, you may not have even noticed what's in your peripheral vision, but it's still there, and your unconscious mind is not putting high priority, but it is aware of what's going on back there, right? The same with hearing. It's hearing and noticing stuff that's in the distant background that you're not focusing on. Especially if you're listening to something very specifically, it'll actually drown out what's in the background. It'll sort of take the focus off in a similar way to like a lens and all that sort of stuff, but with hearing, it's quite interesting, all psychoacoustic stuff. And then, yeah, it's doing all this stuff without you even consciously realizing it, because it's not putting all this stuff on the screen, right? It's just got all this stuff going on in the background. So, isn't that interesting? So how can we bring it back to the context of multitasking? Well, when you first learned to drive, you were conscious of everything. I like to hope you were. I'd like to hope that whoever was teaching you how to drive was telling you to check your mirrors before you check your mirrors, indicate before you check your mirrors, then check your mirrors, and then don't start turning the wheel or slowing down or anything until you've checked what's going on around you, right? And then your driving instructor, or maybe your instructor says, oh, there's a red light and the road is wet, you want to brake early because otherwise we might slide into that car, or whatever. Bringing the focus of your attention, aka your conscious mind, in on all these sorts of things. Notice the road conditions, notice the way your car brakes, notice how to change gears, and in time, these things become so commonplace that they become automatic. Now, when something becomes automatic, another way of saying that is it sinks into the unconscious mind, and the unconscious mind can now do all this stuff without you consciously thinking about it. That's how I can make these videos, because even me speaking is coming from my unconscious mind. I haven't like sort of planned this out to any great degree. Like, it's not a script that I have to rehearse and then start remembering and focusing in on what was the next word that I'm supposed to say and all that sort of stuff. In the same way, my driving, you'll notice while I'm making these videos, I'm constantly checking my mirrors, you know, as I'm driving. I'm not thinking about checking my mirrors. I'm checking my mirrors. And then I'm doing that. I'm talking, and talking doesn't affect my visual cortex, my visual information. So I'm capable of looking around. Car just came up the side of me. Without even thinking, I go and look at it. Like, oh, there's a car right there. I noticed it in my mirror before, but now it's right there. So that is multitasking. I'm talking, and that brings us to another area of multitasking. Is being able to multitask. Multitasking is difficult when, for example, you have to talk about something and then think about something different at the same time. That is very, very, very difficult. However, because the reason why is because you're using your sound stuff, your mouth and your hearing and all this sort of stuff while you're speaking. But when you think about something, I don't know about you, but I think in words. I think in words and pictures and all this sort of stuff, but it is a oral sort of thing. Oral sort of thing, right? So I'm hearing a voice as I'm speaking in my mind. So trying to speak in my mind and speak out loud at the same time is, I'm sure, impossible for most people. Not everyone, but most people. However, it is very, very possible to do something kinesthetic, which is something physical with your hands or something doing things in the real world, right? Kinesthetic, touching and manipulating with your phalanges, right? And so as an example, you could be painting. And painting is utilizing visual and kinesthetic, right? Because you're looking at what you're painting, and you're using your imagination to draw something that's in your mind, or flesh out something that you've already sketched up, and then you're just trying to add details or figure out where the colors go, or whatever. Maybe you're just coloring in, whatever. You can do that and think about things at the same time. See, because that is kinesthetic, a little bit of visual. Visual's not even being totally tied up, but it's not really using your hearing very much. So from that regard, it's possible, it's a lot easier, I should say, to think about something that happened in your day, for example, while you paint, or while you build speakers, or while you're driving. Driving is incredibly kinesthetic. Now, in the same way, if you were really deep in thought while you were driving, which is probably not the greatest idea, but if you were deep in thought, you may not notice certain things that you're hearing. Maybe someone's screeching their tires and you don't even notice it because you're just zoned out thinking about what you're thinking about, right? Because it's tying up the auditory, oral auditory, that's a better word, auditory section of the brain. But kinesthetic things that involve your hands, are very easy to do in the background while you're processing other things. You're still not giving your full attention, but you can certainly do things automatically. Wash the dishes while you're thinking about your day. You know what I mean? That's super easy and super common for people to do. Or while they're figuring out a complex maths thing or a complex social thing or whatever. You can do those sorts of things. And that's multitasking. And that's true multitasking. Because the final point on multitasking is not what I'd call true multitasking, but actually, I've got one more after this actually, but is it can appear like multitasking, and that's where you think about something, then you put that on hold, then you think about the next thing, then you go back to the first thing, and then you run through all these different things, and by the end, you've run through a whole bunch of different processes at once, but you've run through all these different processes at once, and it kind of feels like multitasking, but it's actually doing one process at a time, right? And that's incredibly useful. That's incredibly useful. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to think it's not incredibly useful. But it's kind of one form of multitasking. In fact, early computer systems actually used that as their multitasking. They would give 100% of the CPU to one program, then switch it to the next program, 100% of the memory, and they'd switch to the next one. Early versions of Windows used to use that, and that was the problem with that is the same problem that we have with the human mind, is that sometimes the program would crash, aka the program would halt. It would run into a problem and not be able to go any further, and without being able to finish that process, the processor couldn't allocate its full attention onto the next application. It couldn't switch to the next one because this one hadn't finished processing yet, right? And we can certainly, everyone has experienced that, where they're trying to think of a bunch of things at once, and then they get stuck on one thing and they just can't quite figure it out, so they never move on to the next process. That often happens with all sorts of mental problems as well, like when you get on a thought loop. That's what a thought loop is, when you can't move on, because it's like the program has crashed, basically. And you're just looping and looping and looping until you find a resolve. Sometimes when you talk with someone else about that issue or that thought or that problem, that can break you out of the thought loop because you've finally got some sort of resolution to whatever that thought might be. Finally, there's the unconscious processes. And this is also true multitasking, but it's slightly different to how you imagine. So you can only consciously think of one thing at a time. We've established that. You can think of multiple things at a time that are using different parts of the mind, the kinesthetic, the visual. Sometimes you can imagine and the auditory. You can imagine a auditory sound at the same time as imagining a picture or a movie, right? And you can change those two things independently, right, in your imagination, as an example, while you're washing the dishes, right? Absolutely, you can do that. However, there's also a way to utilize the unconscious mind to help with multitasking. It's very tricky. Everybody does it, but it's very difficult to do on purpose, right? And what it is you will set it up, imagine all the parameters, everything there is to do about figuring this thing out, right? But then what you do is you establish what the question is, what the problem is, and that it needs a solution, and these are the parameters of the solution and all that sort of thing. Think about it quite deeply, and then move on to the next thing. And what you can find is that while you're doing this thing, the answer will just come to you, and then you'll be like, oh shit, eureka, I've figured it all out, right? I've just figured out the answer to that problem that I was thinking about, that I had. And sometimes that will take minutes, sometimes it will take hours, sometimes it'll take days, and sometimes it'll take weeks or months. But that is another form of multitasking, because the minute it goes in, what it's doing is it's placing, it's basically kind of like writing some code. This is the problem, it needs a solution. And then placing it into the unconscious mind, and then trusting that your unconscious mind will figure it out. And maybe you'll have to come back to it every now and then, like just be like, oh yeah, so what was that thing I was thinking about? Okay, cool. I'm sure I'll figure it out later. And you leave it and you come back to it. It's a bit more of a long-term strategy, but it is still multitasking. It's pretty powerful stuff. And if you don't have any urgency to figuring things out right away, then that's super, super, super useful. It sounds a bit airy-fairy, doesn't it? But at the same time, I think everybody's experienced it before, you know, like that moment where they've thought about something in the past, they couldn't figure it out, they've just left it, they've moved on, and then like a couple of hours later, a day or two later, it just comes, oh my gosh, I remember that thing I was trying to think of that I forgot. It was Will Smith. Will Smith, that's the name of the guy. Oh my gosh. You know? And so it just comes to you. Oh, I use a capacitor to do that thing. Oh, it's the egg that makes it solid. Oh. Or whatever it might be, whatever your thing is. So that's like a fun little way of using. So these are the sort of things I was trying to think of, and this in itself is a great example of multitasking in itself, because every couple of days I've been trying to think of how I can word this, and I think I've finally figured out how to word it in a way that hopefully makes the most sense. Hopefully you guys are like, yeah, I get that. I get what you're trying to say there. Chris, you make sense right there. So that's my thoughts on multitasking and how to use it, how to understand it. Because the other thing is, if you understand how multitasking works in the human brain, or at least just my understanding of it, maybe it can help you multitask yourself, especially that last one, because that last one relies on you trusting in yourself, believing in yourself, and believing that you'll figure it out. I know a lot of people who get quite a lot of anxiety about figuring things out. They're like, I can't figure it out. Oh my gosh. No, I can't just leave it for now. I can't leave it for tomorrow. I need to know what's going on right now. I need to figure this out now. And you'll be like, there is no deadline right now. Yeah, but it's just going to bug me. And the more it bugs you, the harder it is for you to figure it out. Because The reason why your unconscious mind can figure it out better than you can consciously, a lot of the time, is that your conscious mind can only hold so many things on the screen at once. But your unconscious mind has access to every single memory that you've ever had in your entire life. Every single experience you've had in your entire life. You cannot consciously bring up every single memory or experience or memory of experience to your conscious mind at the same time. Like, you can think of them one at a time. Like, you try it now. You can imagine memories one at a time, but you can't imagine them all playing at the same time. As an example, like, one way that you could try to attempt to do this is close your eyes and imagine videos playing in front of you with sound and emotions. Like, just, even if we take away the sound and the emotion being a kinesthetic, sound being auditory, and video obviously being visual, just having video information. Imagine you close your eyes and have all these videos playing in front of you at once, simultaneously, like you're sitting in front of like one of those security cam things where all these memories are playing simultaneously. I think you, like most people, would have a very hard time playing all those videos simultaneously and being able to visualize it and all that sort of thing. Your conscious mind just can't multitask in that way, right? But you could certainly have the visual information, the video playing at the same time as maybe the sound of a song you like, which is an auditory memory. Or, you know, like, be careful with this one, because sometimes when you remember things like in this way, where you're crossing memories and crossing things like this, they can anchor together. But you could even anchor, you could imagine a video and then remember what it's like to be happy. And then you can feel happy while you're watching a really boring video, because you remember what that feels like. So be careful with that one. Don't try to think of a really horrible memory, because your mind might actually connect the happy feeling with the bad memory, and that might be good, that might be bad, depending on lots of factors that I won't get into, but just be careful with that one. But yeah, anyway, that's a whole nother topic that I'm thinking of that I'd love to talk about, but anyway, just have a think about all those things that I've just said. Maybe watch this video again, and what I'm doing as well, one last thing to leave you on. When you watch these videos and you give them the correct attention, what it's going to do is it's going to install into your mind unconsciously, right? It's going to go, part of your mind is getting caught up with all this conscious information, like, oh yeah, that makes logical sense, okay, yes, I've experienced that before, blah, 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 right? But the actual foundational lesson behind it all, that's going to seep over the next few days. It's going to start processing in the back of your mind and really solidify in a way that, like, for example, you might be out doing stuff in your day or whatever, and then you get reminded of something. Now, memories are stored in the unconscious mind, so you I might have said something about a video and a memory being played at the same time, and you might see a video and a memory and then remember me. Well, that's because it's been installed, and it takes a couple of days for information to really be permanently installed into the back of the mind, the unconscious mind. Takes seconds. It's almost instant for the conscious mind to make sense of stuff, but the unconscious mind, it does take a few days. So hopefully that was interesting and fun. It's a bloody long video, and I do apologize for that, but yeah, hopefully that was interesting and fun. Have a great day, guys.